challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives of George Samueli. It is now 9:13 p.m. on a very dark, sunless, grim uh, time in Budapest. I always say it's gonna be like this. It's gonna be like this in the fall, through the winter, all the way through to next spring. No light, no sun, no nothing. Anyway, welcome everybody who has joined me. Really appreciate it. And just as we started, the news broke that Prince Andrew, who is the king's younger brother, has been stripped of all his titles. So he's not just been stripped of the title of Duke of York, he's been stripped of the title of prince. He's not even going to be referred to as a prince. And he's also been told to vacate his residence, which is a kind of a public residence. And now, I've never had a lot of time for Prince Andrew. Just was not interested in him. However, I do think that this is very unfair because whatever's now being leveled at him, the accusations that are being leveled at him, are all based on the testimony of Virginia Giuffre, who is a serial fabulist, a liar, a smearer, a money grubbing opportunist, who saw a way of making a lot of money by smearing a lot of famous men. We know that she made stuff up. We know that from the case of Alan Dershowitz. We know it from her own lawyers. Her own lawyers admitted that her memoirs are not really memoirs in a strict sense of the word. They are basically, they constitute a work of fiction. So, on the basis of that, I think Andrew has really been very hard done by. I wouldn't want to lose everything, and most importantly, my reputation, because he's not a young man. So it's basically, his life is, he's reaching the evening years of his life. He doesn't have much time to rehabilitate himself. So he's more or less now going to be smeared as somehow the rapist of Virginia Giuffre. And I think it's very unfair and very unworthy, in any way of any royal family. And I have to say, Charles can bloody talk. Now, admittedly, Charles was never accused of pedophilia. And again, as I say, I don't believe any of the stories about Andrew, but Charles was certainly not accused of that. However, he did begin cheating on his wife almost immediately. I mean, this wasn't just he waited a little bit of time before he took up with his old girlfriend, Camilla Parker Bowles. He began right away. And he did it, obviously, behind the back of his wife. And, that was, very, very unpleasant for her. And of course, it led to their very acrimonious divorce. And then their very acrimonious living apart from each other and so on. And not to mention it gave rise to all the speculations about her sudden death. So it's not like he is somebody who's a model of moral probity. Not somebody who can afford to be very censorious about members of his family. So anyway, that's that. Now, a couple of other things I want to talk about. The This has been one of those stupid days where in which liberals somehow their minds go spring back into some kind of antediluvian memories, and then they start mouthing slogans from some 30, 40, 50 years ago. So what really brought this on, this strange snapback, as if we sort of travel back in time. Liberalism has a sort of peculiar logic of its own that it's very hard to figure. What brought this on was Trump announcing on his way to meet Xi Jinping that the United States would go back to uh, testing nuclear weapons. So let's just first of all take a look at Trump's announcement to the news media, and then we'll take a look at his uh, the truth that he sent out. So here is on the plane talking to the reporters. Where are we? I thought I had. All right, let me find this again.
It had to do with others. They seem.
Okay. So there we try again. Yeah, so here he is, and
Had to do with others. They seem to all be nuclear testing. We have more nuclear weapons than anybody. We don't do testing. We've halted it many years ago. But with others doing testing, I think it's appropriate that we do also. We have more than anybody. When I see them testing, I say, well, if they're going to test, I guess we have to test. I'd like to see a denuclearization because we have so many, and Russia has so Russia's second, and China's third, and China will catch up within 4 or 5 years. I think de-escalation would be they would call it denuclearization would be a tremendous thing, and it's something we are actually talking to Russia about that, and China would be added to that if we do something.
All right. So that's Trump's announcement, and then he sent out a truth spelling this out, and let's take a look at that. So it says the United States has more nuclear weapons than any other country. This was accomplished, including a complete update and renovation of existing weapons during my first term in office, because of the tremendous destructive powers. I hated to do it, but had no choice. Russia is second. China is a distant third, but will be even within 5 years. Because of other countries' testing programs, I have instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis. The process will begin immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So the first thing we happen is that we have this meltdown by declaring, "Oh well, America's not number one. Russia's number one. Russia has more nuclear weapons than the United States." Well, okay, let's not get bogged down with that stupid argument because it all depends on how you start counting. Because if you count, yes, the total number of warheads, Russia has more, but it also depends who has more strategic warheads. The United States has more strategic warheads. Who has more launchers? The United States has more launchers. But okay, this is such a stupid argument as to who has more. Just because Trump said the United States has more, so then everyone went, no, the United States does not have more. Russia has more. Then the next part of it was that somehow this testing is terribly, really awfully, horrifically, nightmarishly destabilizing. What's going to happen to arms control? Now, it at the moment, the very people who are kind of screaming out, "Well, what's going to happen to arms control?" were the ones who were advocating and still are advocating that Ukraine be given Tomahawk missiles. Now, give them the tomahawks. You got to Trump is betraying Ukraine by not giving them tomahawks. Um, Now let's keep in mind the thing about the tomahawks. The tomahawks are able to carry conventional warheads and they carry nuclear warheads. So when you launch a tomahawk at Russia, the Russians do not know whether it's carrying a conventional warhead or a nuclear warhead. So it's already extremely destabilizing. And but nonetheless, the people, oh no, that's fine. Yes, send them the tomahawks. That's a liberal. That's the liberal cry. This isn't just a bunch of Republican war hawks. These are liberals. Yeah, give them the Michael McFaul. Give them the tomahawks. Give them the tomahawks. Even though, as I said, Russia would not know whether when you launch a tomahawk, it's carrying a conventional or a nuclear warhead. Moreover, and this is the most important point about the tomahawks, is that they cannot be launched by Ukraine. Only the United States can launch them. They require satellite information from the United States on targeting, and they require the satellite guidance from the United States, how to avoid Russia's anti-missile defense system. So only the United States can do that. So in the moment a tomahawk is launched at Russia, it is the United States that is launching the tomahawks. It's not Ukraine. United States is launching tomahawks at Russia. Right. So the United States is launching tomahawk missiles that the Russians do not know carry a conventional or a nuclear warhead, and that's fine. No problem there. No problem there. No, that's okay. No one worries about that. No, that the fact that if anything will trigger a nuclear war, then it's the launch of Tomahawk missiles against Russia. But the liberals are all signed on for that. But this nuclear testing, my God, this is so destabilizing. This is now. When I said earlier, this is antediluvian sort of sentiments. Is that somehow this goes back to decades and decades and decades ago, into the 1970s and 80s, when you had we're back when the neocons were kind of ardent supporters of Ronald Reagan. The neocons were against arms control, and liberals tended to be for arms control. So what happened was that you had these kind of arguments in which the New York Times would sternly be on the side of arms control, and then you had the neocons who said, "Oh, the arms control, we don't want to get into arms control agreements because the Soviet Union always cheats," which is of course untrue. The Soviet Union never cheated on arms control. But no, we can't have arms control. So Soviet Union cheated, and liberals will say, "Yeah, arms control, yeah, we have arms control." Now, during the time of détente, the heyday of détente, which is, let's say, 1964 to 1980, during that time, nuclear testing was performed regularly by the Soviet Union and by the United States. From 1964 to 1980, the United States carried out something like 360 nuclear tests. I think the Soviet Union carried out something like 500. So 360 over 16 years. So that comes to more than 20 a year. That's more than one a month on average. Nobody thought that was destabilizing, because it's not destabilizing. There was a partial test ban treaty that was enacted in 1963 in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The partial test ban treaty prohibited nuclear testing in the atmosphere and underwater. And then the United States and Soviet Union, adhere to that. The French did not. The French continued testing nuclear weapons underwater. But basically, the United States and the Soviet Union continued to test, but they did it underground. And nobody thought that, oh, this is destabilizing, because you had arms control agreements and you had détente. Now, the testing is not in itself in any way, shape, or form destabilizing. What is destabilizing is waging proxy wars against your nuclear superpower competitor. Even more destabilizing is attacking the land of your competitor. That's destabilizing. That's dangerous. But testing is not dangerous. And so suddenly everyone, oh my God, this is so, what are we going to do? This is, what's happened to the arms control group? Now, I'm not exactly a huge fan of nuclear testing. But I also think that it's of no importance whatsoever. What matters is the things that are really dangerous and really threatening. I think launching medium range and long range missiles onto Russian territory, launches that are actually conducted by the United States, are extremely destabilizing, are extremely dangerous because it's unlikely that the Russians will put up with it forever. Why would anyone put up with it forever? The United States wouldn't put up with it for 5 minutes. So that but the testing, there's we go, the comprehensive test ban treaty. Now, there is no comprehensive test ban treaty. That was basically the United States signed the comprehensive test ban treaty in 1996, but it never ratified it. In 1999, they tried. The Senate voted against ratification, so it basically isn't applicable law in the United States. The United States voluntarily accepts the strictures of the comprehensive test ban treaty, but it doesn't have to. So it's just there. In the same way that SALT II was signed, it was never ratified, but the United States voluntarily accepted the limitations demanded by SALT II. So that's the comprehensive test ban treaty. It's just there. Russia signed and ratified, but Russia then withdrew its ratification and said that it was paralleling the United States position, that it would sign voluntarily, accept the restrictions of the comprehensive test ban treaty, but basically doesn't have to do it. So this really means very little, and so the people who pick on, oh well, Trump said that he's going to instruct the Department of Defense, but actually the nuclear weapons, that's handled by the Department of Energy. Oh, Trump is getting it wrong. It doesn't. None of that matters in the slightest. What matters is that the two nuclear superpowers do not go to war with each other. That's what matters. But that is absolutely not what current the liberal policy-making dogma that prevails in the United States and in NATO land, because everybody is absolutely determined to push for a war. That's destabilizing. Arms control are only of any use as a part of a general improvement of relations among the great powers. Then this arms control is very nice, because an arms control would be evidence of an improvement in relations. It's part of a détente, and the heyday of the arms control treaties coincided with the heyday of détente. The big arms control treaties were signed in the 1970s, which is the heyday of détente. The reason why there's just the New START treaty is the only arms control agreement that is still in existence, and it's due to expire in February of next year. The reason why that's the case is that for the past 10 years, there has been a steady move to sharpen and escalate a conflict with Russia. And step by step, the United States has moved away from all of the arms control agreements, which have and coincided with a growing antipathy and hostility toward Russia. And so arms control is just a part and parcel of that. There's no separate. Oh, well, we'll have we can be close to war here in Ukraine, but we can still have arms control treaties. That's the sort of liberal mentality. Yeah, we can absolutely launch Tomahawk missiles on Russia. Oh, yeah, that's fine. But we can also have an arms control treaty. You can't have an arms control treaty when you're on the brink of war. It's just so stupid. It's just unbelievable. But here you have the I'm just giving you an example from Newsweek that says, oh, well, first of all, TASS actually responded, reasonably. Just said, well, okay, if United States goes down that path, then we'll do the same thing. They didn't threaten war or anything. Yeah, we'll respond in kind. I mean, if they're going to start nuclear testing, we'll start nuclear testing. That's a very moderate, reasonable, measured position. I think Russia should resume testing if the United States resumes testing. It says Russia is closely monitoring potential violations of the international moratorium on nuclear testing and will respond accordingly if such actions occur. That was Peskov. The United States is a sovereign nation and has the right to make sovereign decisions. However, I would like to recall President Putin's repeatedly stated position: if anyone breaks the moratorium, Russia will respond in kind. And then here's Newsweek. Russia warns Trump nuclear tests will lead to chaos. A senior Russian lawmaker has warned that any U.S. move to resume nuclear weapons testing, halted since 1992, would trigger a destabilize, because we're living in this world of real stability. Yeah, we're sending arms by the truckload into Ukraine to kill Russians, but this is destabilizing, because this is wonderfully stable what we have at the moment. Destabilizing chain reaction, accusing Washington of undermining global strategic stability and violating the spirit of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. As I say, it's so stupid because the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty does not exist. Does not exist. I mean, if it's an agreement that you simply volunteer out of the goodness of your heart to adhere to, then it's not any kind of a contract. There's no contract. So it's just a ridiculous thing. But notice how suddenly the Newsweek is talking respectfully about a senior Russian lawmaker. The move drew swift criticism from arms control experts and lawmakers who warned that it could undermine international treaties and provoke a new wave of global testing. Russia and China both responded with calls for the U.S. to honor its commitments under the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which Washington has signed but not ratified. This is untrue. I just showed you what Peskov said. Peskov did not say that the United States has to honor its commitments. He said it's a sovereign nation. If they can make their own decisions, we'll make our decisions. That's exactly right. And here, Russian lawmaker warns U.S. nuclear test bans could destabilize global security. And so now they hear a senior Russian. Notice now suddenly they're speaking so respectfully about Russian official. Well, he's a senior official. All this time, these officials are referred to as Putin henchmen, or they're just Putin puppets or whatever. But now he becomes a senior official. He has condemned reported plans by the United States to resume nuclear weapons testing, warning the move could unravel decades of strategic. I didn't realize that we had these decades of strategic stability. I mean, all this time. Remember, they've been talking about how Putin is rattling his nuclear weapons. Putin is threatening to unleash nuclear war. All this talk about how this everything is so perilous because of Putin. Putin, wants to launch an attack against NATO. But now Leonard Slutsky, chairman of the State Duma Committee on International Affairs, said such tests would trigger a chain response and lead to chaos in global security. So suddenly, this Leonid Slutsky is treated with this great respect, senior official, And wonderfully going back to the good old days of the Ronald Reagan, when Reagan, and particularly the people around Reagan, the people that Reagan hired, like Richard Pearl, the people who then returned to power under George W. Bush, Pearl and Elliot Abrams and the rest. They were determined to end the arms control treaties, but in those days they were regarded as the bad guys. I mean, when liberals kind of embraced neoconservatism in later years, that was already some time ago. But back in the 80s, they were regarded as the bad guys. Um, but back then, they did want to walk away from these various treaties. But interesting enough, Reagan never did that. Um, and I mean, when in 1983 he announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, and that was already a clear signal that the United States would walk away from the ABM treaty. But Reagan did not walk away from the ABM treaty. He just said, "Oh, we're gonna develop this Star Wars or Strategic Defense Initiative." It wasn't until 2002 that the United States walked away from the ABM treaty, and but yeah, I mean that was already the sign. But in fact, Reagan signed an additional arms control treaty, which was of course, the INF treaty that was in 1987. In spite of all the neoconservatives that he had hired, but all this time nuclear testing continued because it doesn't matter about the testing. So, but somehow it used to be this liberal mantra that somehow arms control treaties are a really good thing. Test ban treaties are really good things. And that the only people who are against it are somehow warmongers. They seem to have forgotten that the biggest warmongers today are liberals. It's a little like liberals who still invoke McCarthyism, the terrible things of Joe McCarthy. Now, anything that Joe McCarthy did in the late 1940s and early 1950s pales in comparison with the lunacy that we have had from from the kind of liberal elites, from the liberal media of Russiagate. I mean, with Russiagate, I mean, they flatly declared that the president of the United States, they flatly declared the president of the United States is working for the Kremlin. Even Joe McCarthy never said that. And they flatly declared that the election of 2016 was bogus because the Russians stole the election for Donald Trump. They never had any evidence for that, but they said, "Oh yeah, the 2016 election was stolen by the Russians." You know, again, Joe McCarthy never said anything like that. But so that this is now it becomes, but now suddenly this nuclear testing. As I say, it's of no importance whatsoever. Now, continuing the war, where even if Trump doesn't send the Tomahawks, I mean, if he sends the ATACMS, that is dangerous. That's something because the Russians really are not going to like anything like that. That's a very definitely that's destabilizing. But testing, nah, it's not destabilizing. And as I said, what's important here is that that back in the heyday, the glorious heyday of détente, that was 1964 to 1980. I think the United States conducted 360 tests. underground tests, 360. Soviet Union carried out about 500. No one bothered. Thought that this was some big deal because arms control treaties were being signed. But even more important, there was détente and all sorts of outstanding issues that divided the United States and the Soviet Union were being resolved during those years. Like the issue of Berlin was being resolved. The test ban treaty that the four power agreement on Berlin was resolved. I was talking to someone the other day, about the release of Cardinal Mindszenty, who was, the Americans kept him from the Hungarian authorities from 1956 through to 1971. He lived for 15 years. The chief of the Roman Catholic Church in Hungary, was basically, living in the U.S. embassy because he was threatened with arrest by the Hungarian government. So 1956, 1971, and finally, again, the product of Dayton, they worked out an agreement whereby Mindszenty could leave the country. Again, it's détente. You can do those things. When there's no détente, then yeah, we're not going to do anything to help Mindszenty leave. So that's the advantage of having good relations among the superpowers, and I think that is a desirable goal. Nuclear testing, big nothing. I mean, but it's typical of our moronic media that they made this into some kind of a big issue. Now, the other thing is that we have this sort of rather strange announcement from Vladimir Putin yesterday of suggesting that he was going to call a kind of a several-hour ceasefire in Pokrovsk and Kupiansk to allow journalists to enter basically the site of the conflict and talk to Ukrainian servicemen who are surrounded by Russian forces. Now, it's very, there've been a number of times in the past when Putin has kind of jumped the gun and announced that somehow we've already won here. The enemy is surrounded, and they have no means of escape. It's so we're ready to kill them and whatever. But I will give them one more chance to surrender. As it's happened before. It happened at the time of Mariupol with the Azov steel plant, and of course, it happened in Kursk, where I think Putin a number of times said, "Well, that's it; it's already over. The Ukrainian forces are surrounded, and they have no means of escape." But basically, they weren't surrounded. So, so here was this is Putin speaking yesterday. So he'd visited where are we? Yeah, he had visited the hospital, a military hospital, and he spoke to the wounded servicemen, and that's where he declared that the overall situation in the special military operations zone is developing favorably for us. Your comrades are advancing and taking active action in all areas. In two places, as you know, you've already publicly stated, in Kupiansk and Krasnoarmeysk. Now, Krasnoarmeysk is what the Russians call Pokrovsk. So the enemy has found itself encircled. And incidentally, I discussed this issue with the commanders of the relevant group, Andrei Rimovich. They're not opposed to allowing media representatives, foreign journalists, and Ukrainian journalists into the enemy encirclement zones so they can go in and see for themselves what's happening. They'd like to see the state of the encircled Ukrainian forces so that Ukraine's political leadership can make appropriate decisions regarding the fate of its citizens and its service members. They'll have that opportunity just as they once did as Azovstal, which was at Mariupol. We are only concerned about one thing: no provocations from the Ukrainian side. We are prepared to cease hostilities for a certain period of time, for a few hours, 2, 3, 6 hours, so the journalists can enter these settlements, see what's happening, talk to Ukrainian servicemen, and then leave. We are prepared to bring them to certain points, to a certain point, so that Ukrainian servicemen on the other side can receive them. And then the most important thing is to avoid provocations from the Ukrainian side, so that some drone doesn't land, one of these journalists doesn't get hurt, and then they try to blame the incident on us, which is, of course, what would happen. We don't need that. On the contrary, we are ready to do everything as I'm saying now. The only question is whether the Ukrainian side is ready for this. So anyway, now all of this is completely ridiculous, because, of course, the Ukrainians are not going to agree to this, and they've already said they're not going to agree to this, and they've already warned any media not to go to this combat zone. And there's no real point to it because, you know, as I say, what are you hoping to achieve by this? What the Ukrainians are going to be moved by your humanitarianism. The journalists are going to be moved by your humanitarianism. The Trump administration is going to think you're a really reasonable guy. The Kayakalas will say this is a really fantastic offer. I'm really moved by Putin's generosity in making such an offer. Uh, this is so completely pointless. With war, you've only got one task, which is you destroy your enemy. And you destroy it in such a way that they can never come back to hurt you. That's it. So they accept that they have been completely defeated and that there's no prospect whatsoever of there being another a threat to you again. But this is just nonsensical. What is the point of this conversation? They're going to see the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians will say we're not surrendering. They've already been told by Kiev not to surrender. Kiev, in fact, denies that they are surrounded. And as I said, you know, going by past experience, Putin has on more than one occasion jumped the gun and declared that the enemy is surrounded, we've already won, and that wasn't the case. And so this is just pointless. I mean, there's no good outcome for Russia in all this. I mean, Putin said, "Oh well, they might stage a drone attack and then blame it on us." Yeah, you haven't learned that that's exactly what they're going to do. Just like at Bucha, oh well, we withdrew from Kiev, and then they staged this massacre in order to blame us. And said, yeah, that's what they were going to do. They did this over and over again during in the wars in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and then in Kosovo. Yeah, that's what they'll do. They will absolutely lay out the bodies on the street and then say this was a massacre. This was a cold-blooded massacre perpetrated by the Russians. Yeah, that's exactly what the plan is. Yeah, and yes, there will be a drone attack, and then they will say it was Russia who attacked the journalists, which is, I think, why I don't think any journalists are going to go there and start interviewing any Ukrainian servicemen. So this is a completely absurd exercise, but it does show, again, the certain lack of seriousness on the part of Putin about this war. Putin, as I've said many, many times, needs to get this war over and done with as quickly as possible. as quickly as possible, because the longer it goes on, the greater the danger of an escalation, and the greater the danger that the West will conclude that Russia is very weak and that they can take Russia, that they can attack Russia, and that they can defeat Russia, and that Russia is scared of NATO. So that's why the way to persuade NATO that Russia isn't scared is to get the job done, finish off the Ukrainian forces. So if they surrender, then they should surrender to the Russian forces, and then they should be kept imprisoned. I don't understand these stupid prisoner of war exchanges. I mean, it's never done in any war. You've got a prisoner of war. He's surrendered. He's given up his arms. Then he's kept in captivity. If you exchange prisoners of war, those prisoners of war do what they're supposed to do, which is to report back to their commanding officers. Because any prisoner of war, and this is in the Geneva Convention, any prisoner of war is still essentially under army orders. They're still under the command of their commanding officers. So the moment they are released, they have to do the most obvious thing, which is to report back to their commanding officers, and their commanding officers send them back to the front. So, what is the point of capturing, your enemy if you send them back to the front? Said, well, thank you very much. Thank you for the gun. We're back fighting. And in fact, that's what did happen after that whole Azov steel thing. They were captured, and then there was another one of these exchanges with Abramovich and so on, and then they returned to go on fighting the Russians. Well, that's what they're going to do. That's what they're supposed to do. So that's why you don't release your prisoners of war. They didn't do that in World War II. They didn't do that in Vietnam. I mean, the prisoners of war were not released until the fighting had stopped and until a peace treaty had been signed. And then it's part of the peace treaty that prisoners of war are released. You don't release prisoners of war in the middle of a war. And that's why you don't send in journalists before you've got the job done. You finish the job, and then you go on finishing the job until there's a peace treaty. So that was a kind of a completely bizarre intervention on the part of Putin, and the other thing that I wanted to address, and I was planning to address it on Tuesday. And that was the sort of the peculiarity of the events in the Republika Srpska. So you recall, we talked about the situation whereby you had the Dayton Agreement that was signed in 1995, and how the NATO powers immediately set out to undermine Dayton by granting the powers to the Office of the High Representative, essentially the representative of the international community, which means he was a representative of NATO. He sort of acquired more and more powers through something called the Bonn Powers. This began in 1997 and very quickly undercut the agreement that was signed at Dayton. That's what NATO does. It always does it. Basically undercuts the very agreements that it signs. So what happened is that the Office of the High Representative became much more important than the political representatives, elected political representatives of the nations of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was divided into a kind of Muslim Croat Federation and the Republika Srpska. And then what happened was that the Christian Schmidt, who was the Office of the High Representative, changed the criminal code. He can do it. Basically, he's unelected. He's an unelected bureaucrat, but he can change the criminal code of Bosnia and Herzegovina just off his own back. You can just simply go, here's the criminal code, and I'm going to add something to it. So what he'd said was that he made it a crime to defy his wishes. And he said that any decree that he issues becomes absolutely obligatory on everyone to follow. Now, the Republika Srpska said, "Well, no, we're not going to follow that. We are the elected representatives of the Serbian people. We're not just going to accept the diktats of an unelected bureaucrat." And so they said, "No, we're not going to do that." And this, of course, led to the criminal prosecution of Milorad Dodik, the president of the Republika Srpska, and he was prosecuted and he was convicted. And as a result of his conviction, he was removed from the presidency. He was no longer president. And Dodik did what he usually does, which is to start talking about how, well, maybe he's going to hold a referendum on secession from Bosnia and Herzegovina. But of course, that sort of talk was so ridiculous because he's not president anymore. Since he's not president anymore, he can't order a referendum. And then, he's going to hold a referendum on whether to accept the ruling of the Constitutional Court. He's going to hold a referendum on whether to accept the rulings of the Office of the High Representative. But of course, Dodik didn't do any of that. As always, he just talks and talks and talks and never really does anything. But what was really striking, and that's what I was a little taken aback by, because I thought Dodik would put up a little bit more of a fight. At least he would make a show of defiance, having been removed from the presidency and having essentially had the changes of the criminal code by an unelected bureaucrat. I mean, imposed, and he would at least fight against that. But that didn't happen. On the contrary, the assembly of the Republika Srpska basically went back on what it had done, because it had said the diktats of the Office of the High Representative had no legal validity. We absolutely refuse to accept the legal validity of the diktats of the Office of the High Representative, Christian Schmidt, a German. And then said, that's it. And then they passed legislation saying, no, we're not going to accept those diktats. But instead of that, the Bosnian the Republika Srpska Assembly turned around and said, okay, we've changed our mind. We do now accept the diktats of the Office of the High Representative. And I thought, well, I wasn't expecting that. I thought that it'd put up more of a fight. I didn't think they'd hold a referendum on secession. But I was a little surprised that they were planning, that they were just going to adopt legislation accepting the diktats of the Office of the High Representative. And so here, if you look at these the stories that it didn't get much attention for a little while. And here we have, this is from Balkan Insight. It says, Bosnian Serb leaders' capitulation is just a tactical retreat. And but the Central Election Commission annulled his mandate as president of Republika Srpska. The entity assembly reacted quickly. It withdrew laws that directly ignored the decisions of the state court and the high representative, the international overseer of the continued implementation of the Dayton peace agreements, thus avoiding a direct collision with domestic and international authorities. And then the Republika Srpska Assembly decision to withdraw the disputed set of laws and appoint an acting president did not come suddenly or without background coordination. In parallel with the withdrawal of the law, the United States lifted sanctions on 4 close Dodik associates, sending an unequivocal message. Reducing tensions and institutional leniency can open the door to repairing relations with Washington. And becomes very, very important because after this, which was this was this was a story from Tuesday. Dodik himself was removed from the list of sanctions by the United States. And as they say, at the same time, information surfaced that the U.S. was preparing a set of specific demands in exchange for possible further concessions, meaning the adoption of a state budget, the appointment of a chief negotiator for EU integration, and of judges to the Constitutional Court. So they said, yeah, they want something in exchange. And then alongside this, harsh criticisms are growing. People saying, well, what happened? I mean, he was Dodig, all this big talk. We're going to hold a referendum on this or a referendum on that. And never happened. Some say that Dodik has given in under pressure from the West. Others believe that Republika Srpska has lost its institutional strength while Bosnia is gaining ground. These opinions reflect noticeable changes on the ground. The entity government, that's the Republika Srpska government, can no longer ignore the decisions of Bosnian state bodies, and its ability to obstruct European processes is shrinking every day. Western partners have tightened the rules, but have still left the door open. They are willing to make concessions, but only in exchange for concrete results. And then, although there are more and more frequent stories that sanctions against Dodik and his family could soon be lifted, for now, these remain in the domain of speculation. And then the U.S. Treasury Office of Foreign Assets Control has not yet announced that his closest circle will be removed from the list, and the reasons for which the sanctions were imposed are not at all slight. They include serious allegations of corruption, abuse of public resources, and building a family business network at the expense of the public interest. So that was the situation up until Wednesday, and lo and behold, the sanctions against Dodik were indeed lifted. So you can now see the train of events. Basically the Republika Srpska, after all the talks, secession, this and so on, they withdrew all of the offending legislation. All of the legislation that Christian Schmidt objected to, they withdrew it all, and they got in return the lifting of sanctions against Dodik, and this is let me find this. So this is. So here is the story in Politico. This is today, which is U.S. Lifts sanctions on Putin ally Bosnian Bear. The usual, he's Putin ally. The Trump administration lifted sanctions on Serbian leader Milorad Dodik on Wednesday, reversing course after the U.S. accused the pro-Russian ultra-nationalists, got everything in, pro-Russian, Putin's ally, ultra-nationalists, of causing instability in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Dodik was removed as president of the Republic of Srpska, a Serb-majority territory in August after a court convicted him of defying the international envoy responsible for overseeing the Dayton Accords. And they says that the Biden administration imposed the sanctions against him in 2022. And then the separatist, who enjoys close ties with Putin, has long pushed for Republika Srpska to secede from Bosnia and Herzegovina. He's long pushed, but he's never actually done it. And he's never, he's talked about doing it, but he's never done it. The decision comes after several close allies of Trump's pushed for a lifting of sanctions, including MAGA influencer Laura Loomer and first-term Trump administration officials Rudy Giuliani and Michael Flynn. And here's Dodik, who sent out this tweet. I'm grateful to President Trump and his associates for correcting a grave injustice inflicted upon Republika Srpska, its representatives and their families, and an injustice perpetrated by the Obama and Biden administration. The decision to lift the sanction is not merely a legal correction, but also a moral vindication of the truth about Republika Srpska and all those who have served it with honor. And then once again, it has become clear that the accusations made against us were nothing but lies and propaganda, the very foundation of the chaos created by Christian Schmidt, chaos that must now be undone. And then here's the announcement from the Treasury Department, which is that this was the actual sanctions that were imposed, and this was January the 5th, 2022. And if not just Dodik, but his family and the various media outlets that he controlled. And it says, in response to Dodik's corrupt activities and continued threats to the stability and territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And there he is, he's saying that this Dodik has undermined Bosnia and Herzegovina institutions by calling for the seizure of state competencies and setting in motion the creation of parallel institutions in the Bosnia and Herzegovina entity, which is what Dayton was supposed to do. The whole point of Dayton was to create a kind of a very, very loose confederation where you basically have two autonomous entities. But that obviously wasn't to the satisfaction of NATO, which is why they set about undermining it. They want to create a centralized, unified state. And that's why he was setting in motion the creation of parallel institutions in Republika Srpska. Yeah, in other words, he was doing what was envisaged at Dayton. So that was the. And now, interestingly, here, this is March of this year. This is Marco Rubio. And look what he says about Milorad Dodik. The actions of Republika Srpska President Milorad Dodik are undermining Bosnia and Herzegovina's institutions and threatening its security and stability. Our nation encourages political leaders in Bosnia and Herzegovina to engage in constructive and responsible dialogue. We call on our partners in the region to join us in pushing back against this dangerous and destabilizing behavior. So again, Rubio totally on board for the project of creating a centralized, unified state in Bosnia and Herzegovina with a view to essentially suppressing the Serb component of it, and more important, getting Bosnia and Herzegovina into NATO. So remember, basically NATO has everything in its pocket. Every square inch of Europe is within NATO, with the sole exception of Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, solely, and Bosnia and Herzegovina only because of the resistance coming from the Republika Srpska. And so because of that, Bosnia and Herzegovina is not in NATO. And this is there's been this continued push to get Bosnia and Herzegovina into NATO, and ultimately, of course, Serbia into NATO. But the Serbs resist. The Serbs kind of still feel a little miffed, to say the least, about the NATO bombing of the 1990s, and they're not at all happy about the theft of Kosovo as a result of that bombing in 1999. So this is something NATO has tried to overcome for 30 years. And it's now, but I was going back to what else is left outside of NATO land: Switzerland and Austria. and I guess probably the Republic of Ireland. So the Republic of Ireland, this continues to resist. Um, Switzerland, that's a special case. Austria, I think, will probably soon be amalgamated into NATO. I don't think Austria is resisting particularly strongly, so Austria will probably also join NATO. I mean, it's still adhering to that 1955 treaty, the neutrality treaty. So, but we know how much NATO cares about treaties, so that's going to go straight into the waste paper basket. Um, but Bosnia and Herzegovina is key here. And of course, Serbia is also important because Vucic's term in office is going to come to an end very shortly. I think it's 2027, and that's it. It's they have term limits in Serbia, so he can't run for another term. He's done his 2 terms. So once they can get Vucic out, then I think this is going to Serbia will be ripe for pickings for NATO. But what's happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina is very interesting because what we had this Dodik with all these threats that he's going to secede and whatnot, but apparently everything is now hunky dory because he got the sanctions against himself removed. That doesn't mean he's coming back into office because there was clearly a quid pro quo in this agreement. And there's been a long campaign, which I have to say I wasn't fully aware of just how much pressure was applied by the Republika Srpska on the Trump administration via its various conduits like Laura Loomer, Michael Flynn, Rudy Giuliani, to have those sanctions removed from Dodik. But I think what's very important is to distinguish these two different events. Yes, the sanctions against Dodik are removed. That doesn't mean that somehow Republika Srpska's national aspirations are going to be in any way respected. And so, if we now look at how much pressure was applied, it is really quite striking. So this is the announcement by the Treasury Department. That suddenly they've removed Dodik as from the sanctions list. And then here's a story from in the New York Times that appeared basically just 2 weeks ago. It says about Rudy Giuliani and how he met Dodik, make Srpska great again, and his appearance in the hat at a political rally for Dodik marked the public debut of a costly and wide-ranging influence campaign aimed at persuading the Trump administration to come to the defense of a pro-Russian authoritarian. Well, this is the New York Times. Pro-Russian authoritarian trying to fend off threats to his reign at home. And then the effort has grown to include well-connected lobbyists and lawyers with ties to Mr. Trump, who are being paid about $300,000 per month or more. So that's a lot of money. That all had to have come out of the budget of the Republika Srpska. Their goal is to present Mr. Dodik, a towering figure in Republika Srpska, as a sort of Trump of the Balkans. The Trump administration has publicly kept its distance from Mr. Dodik's cause, and he faces a significant obstacles to remaining in power. But the influence campaign has secured some victories, including meetings with 2 top diplomats appointed by the president and previously unreported sanctions relief for Mr. Dodik's team. And then it goes on, and we have Giuliani, who sent out this tweet about his meeting with Dodik. I appreciate Miller Dodik inviting me and providing me so much time out of his busy schedule to do an in-depth interview. And here's Dodik writing to Giuliani. And I look forward to welcoming you to Republika Srpska and being a guest on your shows to share our story of how President Biden has weaponized the White House to attack the great people of Srpska. So you can see what he's doing here. He's currying favor by saying, Biden is our, and before him, Obama, they are both our enemies. They persecuted both of us and President Trump. And then our people see you as the legendary mayor of New York City, a symbol of resilience and a champion of justice. You have personally experienced how the system can use the judiciary and media campaigns to target political dissenters, making your story one of courage and perseverance. And then so it goes on, but then we can see that another person who came to the assistance of Dodik is Rod Blagojevich. You remember him? He was the former governor of Illinois, went to prison. His sentence was commuted in 2020 by Trump during his first term, and then Trump at the start of this term pardoned him. So Blagojevich has also been lobbying on behalf of Dodik. And then we have Mary Obst, a former aide to Vice President Mike Pence, Christopher Harvin, a veteran Republican operative, and then Srpska also hired Tactic Global, a lobbying firm started this year by Trump allies. That includes Caroline Wren. Caroline Wren is a sort of part of the Bannon world. And then she arranged and attended a meeting in August in Montenegro for Mr. Dodik and one of his top deputies with Richard Grenell. And then here's Politico story. Rod Blagojevich has a new gig. And so Rod Blagojevich has a new job representing the interests of an ultra-nationalist politician. And then here, here it says, you can see what Blagojevich says. He's providing communications, public affairs. I believe the Republic of Serbia and the Republic of Srpska can be bastions of Judeo-Christian values in the Balkans, just like Israel is in the Middle East. This equation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Israel, Serbia and Israel, that's a very significant what they're trying to do here. And Dodik went out of his way to cultivate Israel. He visited Israel to attend an anti-Semitism conference. Israel has these anti-Semitism conferences, and Dodik went there at a time when there was a kind of an international arrest warrant for him. But of course, Israel had no intention of enforcing the arrest warrant. And then here is a story from Haaretz. Dodik gave $840,000 to Israeli lawyer to get U.S. sanctions lifted. And according to a report by Israeli newspaper Haaretz, the president of Dodik has engaged Israeli-American attorney Mark Zell to lobby for the removal of U.S. sanctions imposed against him. Zell, who chairs the Republican Party in Israel, registered as a lobbyist for Republika Srpska in January. And then the lobbying contract signed by Dodik's chief of staff outlines efforts to establish and promote dialogue between Republika Srpska and the incoming administration of Donald Trump. So then, I kind of last week, this is last week, Dodik traveled to Israel to attend a conference on anti-Semitism organized by Israel's Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. However, reports indicate he left the conference shortly after arriving and did not participate in the main sessions. And then there's a source that suggests he was politely asked to leave the event. I don't know if that's true. But here, who is Mark Zell? He is chairman of Republicans Overseas Israel. And I just looked at, some of his recent tweets. I mean, just tweets over the last 2-3 days. I didn't go. He's quite an active tweeter. And he says, there are reports circulating now that Israel is preparing to receive bodies of more hostages today. Expect more Hamas tricks before the day is through. So that you get a sense of where he's coming from. A recently filed defamation suit against Francesca Albanese. She's, of course, that rapporteur, the humanitarian rapporteur for the United Nations. Will address the question. Israelis absolutely hate her. They just called her a witch. But because of the reports that she files about the occupied territories. Will address the question of her diplomatic immunity from suit under international law. The question may, in turn, depend on the legality of her appointment as special rapporteur on the so-called Palestinian territory. So-called Palestinian territories. And then Hamas cannot remain. It must be totally obliterated. There's only one actor who can accomplish this goal. It was and will be the IDF. But here's Peter Szijjártó, Hungarian foreign minister, who is obviously celebrating the lifting of sanctions against Dodik. Great decision. President Dodik has done a lot for RS and Hungary, Republic of Srpska relations. I hope all European colleagues will understand the message of the decision. As Zell says, amen. So you can see kind of the pattern that's formed here. The people who are advocating on behalf of Dodik were very much Israel firsters. As I say, we've looked at Giuliani, was also Michael Flynn, and another one of the people advocating on his behalf was Marcel, more Marcel, and there's Laura Loomer. And Laura Loomer, Dodik suffers relentless political attacks from Muslims and globalists. And again, this is Loomer. And then in the latest example of the brazen assault against Trump-like leaders across the world, Christian President Milorad Dodik of the Republic of Srpska is enduring ruthless political attacks from a coalition of Muslims and globalists. These attacks are occurring as Dodik stands firm as a dedicated supporter of President Trump and as a defender of Western values. Now, Laura Loomer doesn't do anything without getting paid for it. She is obviously also shilling for him, and of course, she's a big shill on behalf of Israel. Now, the reason why this is worth thinking about is that this whole thing, this whole setup with Dodik, this comes at a price. Dodik is not going to be allowed to return to Republika Srpska politics. That was the deal. He gets, the sanctions are removed, but he doesn't get to play a role in politics, and the Republika Srpska gets behind political leaders that will be much more accommodating to NATO. That's the deal. So there's you got rather stupid stories about, that means that Dodik is going to be back in the Republika Srpska politics and so on. No, he's not going to be back in Republika Srpska. He made a deal with the Trump administration. He very shrewdly cultivated the Zionist lobby, the Israel lobby, made himself very useful to that Zionist lobby. And that was not an insignificant thing, that he went to Israel to attend an anti-Semitism conference. And, with all these Flynn and Giuliani and Laura Loomer, they persuaded Trump, said, okay, fine. Now, the reason I showed that earlier tweet by Rubio just shows, the policy of the administration that doesn't change, which is we want Bosnia and Herzegovina to be unified, centralized, and in NATO. So, I think we're now I believe in the kind of the latter stages of the existence of the Republika Srpska. I think it's going to be wound up. I think they're going to have a compliant leadership will emerge there. I mean, the fact that they cancelled those laws that they had passed, all those laws that Christian Schmidt had objected to, they've now withdrawn them. They've now appointed as acting president a woman who's basically also a NATO shill. Um, she actually worked on coordinating relations between NATO and Bosnia and Herzegovina. That's who's now the acting president of the Republika Srpska. So it's now just a matter of time before it's going to be incorporated within NATO. The other lesson from all of this is the very little that Russia was able to do about this. Russia was not able to provide any real assistance to the Republika Srpska. And I think Republika Srpska did turn to Russia and provide and look to Russia to support them if they were to make a move for secession. I mean, that was it. I mean, will Russia support us if we try to secede? But instead, Russia, did its usual thing. We've got to stick to international law, to the treaties, all the agreements that have been signed. So the Russians said, "Oh no, well we support Dayton. We're adhering to Dayton." A really stupid position to take because Dayton was already null and void through the Bonn Powers, which began in 1997. That was the whole point of that, was to undermine Dayton by creating this office of the High Representative, who would be tasked with establishing a centralized state, which is exactly what Dayton was not supposed to achieve. It was precisely a loose confederation that Dayton enacted. And that's why NATO then set about undermining it with this office of the High Representative. But instead, Russia just kept saying, well, we agree with Dayton. There was a moment, I think there was a moment in the past when the Republika Srpska could have made a shot at seceding. It was a risk, but that moment has now passed. And I think that Bosnia and Herzegovina is going to be incorporated within NATO. I think it's another loss, because once Bosnia and Herzegovina is incorporated with NATO, I think the pressure is really going to be on Serbia to withdraw its objections. So Serbia has two basic issues with NATO. There's the issue of Kosovo. They want Serbia to accept the independence of Kosovo. Very hard Serbs to do, and they want Serbia to support EU NATO policy with regard to Russia, and was impose sanctions on Russia. So, just in case you were thinking that the Trump people have turned around and suddenly become pro-Serb, Trump has now imposed sanctions, quite serious sanctions, against Serbia, which is involving its main energy company, because it says its main energy company is owned by Gazprom, Russian company Gazprom. So that's it. You're owned by Gazprom, so we're imposing sanctions against you. Imposing sanctions against you, that's a serious business, because once the Trump administration did this, then the oil producers, they said, well, we can't do any business with this company because they're under sanction. So Croatia, which provides the oil for the oil refineries in Serbia, said, well, we can't do this because you're under sanction. So that's it. So there's no oil to refine now. And then, of course, all the retail gas filling stations. Well, they which are also owned by this company, and which means owned by Gazprom. Well, they can't handle credit cards and debit cards because it's under sanction. So it's a serious economic problem that now Serbia is suffering under, as a result of the Trump administration. They said, "Well, then you got to make your move," and they said, basically, you have to nationalize this company. In other words, take this company away from Russia. Now, Serbia doesn't have any money. They can't very well just nationalize it because they don't have any money to compensate Russia. Well, they said, okay, well, steal the damn thing. I mean, what do we do in Europe? We just steal it. Just steal it and nationalize it and don't pay the Russians any compensation. Um, and Serbia is kind of unwilling to do this. So far, Vucic has been unwilling to seize Serbia's primary energy company and take it away from Gazprom so far. But the key here, which is the Trump administration, is as much as anybody else is pushing Serbia to cut itself off from Russia, and that's what they've done with in Bosnia and Herzegovina. There will be no referendum on secession. That's already gone. There'll be no referendum. There's no point in having a referendum on whether to accept Christian Schmidt's decrees. Well, why would you have a referendum? The parliament, Bosnia's National Assembly has already withdrawn the offending legislation, so already they've accepted Christian Schmidt's decrees. So as I say, it's I think NATO's march into the Balkans, I think, continues. Anyway, let's now take a look at the our locals board and address the comments from the locals community, the people who contribute to us and who work hard to ensure that the dogs are fed and kept happy and rewarded for all for all their hard work. So really appreciate our locals community. I really, thank you so much. And here's Stone River. Good to see you. And Stone River says, George, does Trump becoming Biden Kaya Kallas just go to show that the man doesn't change the system changes the man? Well, that's a very good question. I guess that's probably true. I guess with Trump, it's probably a real question how much he ever really adhered to a kind of non-interventionist, America first, national, independence that he propounded. I mean, if you look back at what he did in 2015, 2016, he essentially took over Pat Buchanan's platform. Remember, Buchanan had already run on these issues in 1992 and then 1996 and 2000, and then of course Ron Paul took up the cry when he ran in 2008 and 2012. So Trump essentially took over this platform that there obviously was a constituency within the GOP for a kind of non-interventionist, anti-neocon view. But Trump did that, and he kind of combined that with an American supremacist position. That the two never really were a good fit, because some of the time he says, well, yeah, we got, non-intervention. We're not going to interfere in other countries' internal affairs. And then the rest of the time he's saying, well, we want America basically to dominate the entire planet. Uh, you can't really combine the two. And so, I think, rhetorically, he still has this, well, yeah, non-interventionism, and supporting, and again, we just looked at with Bosnia and Herzegovina. Oh yeah, these people, they're Christians, they're good people. However, hey, this is a good way of completely taking over the European continent. We just have complete NATO rule over everything. Um, so you say, well, how was it that in the campaign, the 2016 campaign, 2020 campaign, 2024 campaign, he would um, talk disparagingly about NATO? It was completely useless. It's a drain on American resources. It doesn't. It has not. It's had its day. It's kind of has not no relevance to today's problems. But then he transformed that into the mantra that everybody's got to cough up more money, and anyone who doesn't cough up more money for NATO will get punished by the United States. So how is that a criticism of NATO? It's just a way of NATO becoming even stronger and more militaristic and more belligerent. And that's what NATO has done. They're saying, yeah, we're following President Trump. President Trump told us to spend a lot more on our military, and we're doing that. And Trump goes around boasting, oh, well, I have great relations with Stoltenberg, because Stoltenberg always praises me for getting everybody to cough up more money for NATO. So it's because Trump ultimately was never really committed, as Pat Buchanan and Ron Paul were, to a kind of a much more limited, focused American foreign policy. America first wasn't, well, America über alles. America first means, well, we're basically going to be concerned with American national interests, what's good for Americans. We're not going to go around the world seeking monsters to slay. We're not going to go around the world interfering in every country's internal affairs, condemning, sanctioning, punishing other countries. But that's exactly what Trump has done. And that's part of his global supremacy. So, because he left this ambiguous as to what America first meant, that suddenly that suggestion that, oh, well, I'm only concerned with what's good for Americans, became a kind of American global supremacy. And so that's why there really doesn't seem to be any difference between Trump now and the Biden Kaya Kallas view. And he's basically telling the Russians, well, you better get with the program. If you don't get with the program, well, I'm going to sell Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. I mean, that's that's his understanding of America first, rather than anything that, well, hey, what the hell does the Russia-Ukraine war got to do with us? So he used that kind of rhetoric during elections, like, what the hell's it got to do with us? And he probably doesn't care. He really doesn't care very much about the rights and wrongs of this war, but he knows what he has to do in order to maintain his global supremacy and his leadership of NATO. And so, although he doesn't really care very much about the ins and outs of the war in Ukraine, he nonetheless blames everything on Russia. Yeah, he condemns Zelensky. Yeah, he says things like, well, it takes two to tango. And, he gets tired of Zelensky. He obviously doesn't respect Zelensky. But the remarkable thing is, he keeps punishing Russia. He never punishes Zelensky. Ukraine never pays any kind of a price. Well, it's always against Russia. I mean, look, again, as I said, look what he did in Serbia. So apparently, it's Serbia, Christian country, and whatever, and he's basically seeking it to bring it to its knees in order to force Serbia to turn against Russia. It's basically, we're going to make things so bad for you that you'll have no choice but to steal your main energy company from Gazprom. In other words, we're going to make you turn against Russia. So that's his position. That's the Biden view. That's the Callas view. But that's probably how he thinks. That we're going to maintain complete American supremacy. After all, under Trump, a number of countries have now joined NATO. So how is he in any way anti-NATO? We've had a number of countries. With Montenegro, North Macedonia joined NATO. We'll see. We'll see whether the Bosnia and Herzegovina will join NATO under his watch. But everything he has done is geared towards making NATO more supreme, including, of course, his demands that everyone coughs up more money, and he's threatening Spain because Spain has the temerity not to raise defense spending up to 5% of GDP. So that's the enemy of NATO. He's going to punish Spain for not coughing up more money for NATO. Um, anyway, thank you so much, Stone River. And then Robert says, Kaya Kallas, one of the EU's many smirking apparatchiks. Yes, so there's so many of them. They're all much of a muchness. Kaya Kallas, the Annalena Baerbock. I'm sure she'll be back. And then you have that the Finn chick, the prime minister. That what the name always escapes me because I'm so used to saying the Finn chick that I was Sarin or Sarin Mana. I think Sarin is something or other. She now works for Tony Blair. Then you've got the Swedish foreign minister, looks very much like that, and then Mette Frederiksen, the Danish prime minister. They're all much of a muchness. And of course, presiding over all is the smirking Ursula von der Leyen. So anyway, NK MRD says technically there could have been 100 years of peace in Europe, but people messed it up quite a while ago, I suppose. It would have been a thing. Yeah, that's right. That's right. But of course, it's interesting that I talked at some length on Monday about what Lavrov said in that interview with the Hungarian media outlet, I think Ultrahung. He's basically saying that we were on the brink of an agreement in Anchorage, Alaska. That Steve Witkoff, acting obviously on behalf of Trump, had put forward a proposal. He had presented it to Putin, and that proposal essentially, the Donbass, Ukraine would withdraw from the Donbass, but the conflict would be frozen in Kherson and Zaporozhye, and then presumably they would have to negotiate all the issues about demilitarization of Ukraine. We don't know the details of the Witkoff proposal. But what we do know, and what Lavrov says, and no one has denied it, Lavrov said that the Witkoff proposal was discussed at Anchorage. We went through it point by point, and we accepted it. And the way Lavrov framed it was, to every point in that plan, we said, "Is that your proposal? Do you agree to this?" And then the American team, it was Trump, who said, "Yeah, that's our proposal." And so they each of those proposals The Russians agreed. Trump said, yeah, we agree. So there was an agreement clearly in place in Anchorage, Alaska. And then Trump went back to Washington, and then all these, and clearly there was absolute panic stations in Europe from all the Starmers and Phony Maloney and Merz, Schmerz, and Macron, and they all descended on Trump in on that Monday, that Friday, and then the following Monday, they all with Zelensky because they were absolutely panicking that there may be a deal in the works. And then Trump walked away from it. Just walked away from it. So he could have had the deal, and then he walked away. And at that point, you'd have to say that it became Trump's war. Up until then, you could say, well, it's still he inherited a war, and it's Biden's war. But given that he had a possible deal that he would have accepted, and he refused, he pushed it aside. The war continues. Then he becomes his war, and then he compounded this by proposing a meeting in Budapest, and then 24 hours later, he goes back to his completely discredited idea of a ceasefire in place, which he knew that the Russians would never accept. So that's it. It becomes Trump's war. So then he becomes Biden and Kaya Kallas, because now he doesn't really have anything other than just keep spitting venom at Putin, and alternating that with saying, well, I have very good relations with Vladimir. I really, we get on really well, and we're going to have a meeting. At some point we're going to have a meeting. So that's just nothing. There's no strategy there, just because he says something nice about Putin one day and then calls him out on bullshit the next. So that's not the strategy. So that makes it Trump's war. It's very simple. I mean, it's that when once you have a peace agreement that's within reach, and then you push it, toss it away, then that you own the war. You own everything that comes after it. So anyway, we got Robert. Always good to see you, Robert. So the news from the Garden State, and really, really interesting. Their news. So, what's going on in New Jersey? The New Jersey governor's race is neck and neck. A new poll shows Democrat Mikey Sherrill at 49% and Republican Jack Ciattarelli at 48%, with just 2% undecided. A dead heat heading into election day. Now, the one thing. I am curious about, Trump hasn't done any kind of campaigning. I mean, I know he's against Cheryl, and he's put out some truths on that. But as far as I know, he hasn't done anything. I mean, he hasn't come to New Jersey and campaigned against her. Now, I realize he's quite busy, but it's still odd that he didn't at least show up and and campaign for Ciattarelli, particularly in the last election, the 24 election. New Jersey almost came within reach of the Republicans. I think the Kamala Harris's margin in New Jersey was, I think, 5%. So that doesn't quite put New Jersey within reach, but in theory, you can say, well, okay, we're making progress. Maybe one or two more election cycles, and we could be competitive in New Jersey. So I'm surprised he hasn't done more. So, and Anne Marie, always very good to see you. As I always say, Anne Marie is a resident musical scholar, musical performer, who's a very distinguished musician, plays in renowned orchestras, and worked with eminent composers and conductors in 20th and 21st centuries, and we're always the amazing beneficiaries of her knowledge, of her expertise, and all of the inside information that only a professional musician can provide. So we're just always just extraordinarily fortunate to have her here and to have her to be the beneficiary of her amazing musical knowledge. So thank you, Anne Marie. Thank you for all of your comments. So always very interesting and stimulating. And of course, thank you so much for your very generous contributions. Now, V. Michele, 70, says, "Good evening from Ireland." I always good to hear from Ireland. There was apparently a Russian military plane landed in Venezuela. I doubt it had anything of note. Probably Maduro is looking for accommodation in Moscow, as that's the biggest help Russia will provide. Sadly, I think that's true. I mean, as we were saying earlier, apropos of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Russia really hasn't provided any help. Now, you could say, there's limited what it can do, but I mean, if he can't do much in Bosnia and Herzegovina, he can't do much for Serbia. I remember, Russia did go to war on behalf of Serbia in 1914. It doesn't do much now. When it comes to Venezuela, there's really very little Russia can do. I think Maduro is in a very tight spot. Unfortunately, I think it's again completely outrageous. But how Trump, I suppose, a non-interventionist, non-imperialist, has but the it again everything kind of transmogrifies in Trump's view of the world. I mean, he talks about Monroe Doctrine, but the Monroe Doctrine really didn't. It wasn't supposed to be. America's going to dominate the Western Hemisphere. That everybody in the Western Hemisphere has to do what America tells it to do. I mean, the Monroe Doctrine was really a defensive strategy on the part of the kind of the young United States, which is to prevent other great powers, the great powers that the United States feared, other great powers ensconcing themselves in the Western Hemisphere. That's what the Monroe Doctrine was about. But basically, how do we prevent, particularly Great Britain and France, essentially, you know, expanding their empire into the Western Hemisphere. So it was a kind of defensive strategy on the part of Monroe. But Trump doesn't see it that way. Monroe Doctrine to him is that, well, we just get to do whatever we want to do. We don't like Maduro. We don't like him because we say he's a communist. That acquired very little resonance. No one really believed he's a communist. But even if he is a communist, how do you get to bomb, attack, invade a country just because it's communist? I mean, America tried to do that with Cuba, the Bay of Pigs. That turned into an absolute fiasco. So, Trump has now come up with an alternative, which is, well, we'll just say he's head of a drug cartel. No evidence for that, none whatsoever. But say, yeah, we have to fight narco terrorism, and Maduro is the narco terrorism in chief. You think, well, just a minute, I thought he was a communist. When did he suddenly become a narco terrorist? That doesn't really matter. Trump just sort of makes this up, and he probably thinks, hey, that's about America first. Because it's America first. We just get to do whatever we want to do. But there's really very little anyone can do to save Maduro, which is why Maduro has been trying to placate the Trump administration, promising all kinds of goodies, all kinds of uh, you know, economic favors, taking over companies and so on. But Trump hasn't. He's not interested in doing any kind of a deal with Maduro. He wants him out. So, in whatever, however much Maduro tries to appease Trump, it's not going to work. Trump is determined to get him out. And why it's difficult for him is that I am sure that they are going to offer him some kind of a amnesty. So, okay, well, you step aside. We won't come after you. Step aside, leave the presidency, and we promise we're not going to come after you. Now, nothing that the United States promises is to be believed. They will absolutely come after Maduro. The moment he steps aside, they're going to try and either assassinate him or kidnap him and take him to the United States. So, to just return to your question, he's only safe out is if he steps aside and gets on a plane and leaves for Moscow. And I think that's his only way, because if he steps aside, stays in Venezuela, or goes to some other country in Latin America, he will be killed. He will be killed, or he will be abducted and taken to the United States. The only place I think is going to be safe is in Russia. Um, anyway, Steve K9 says Trump is just jealous of the new Russian weapons. He doesn't understand the difference between a nuclear powered weapon and a nuclear warhead. We don't have the former, so we will start testing warheads. There isn't much significant. There isn't much significant, I would think. You're just testing whether they still work. Back in the 60s, the Soviet Union constructed a 100 megaton warhead, so I don't think we can go much beyond that. I absolutely agree with that. I think it's just a complete nothing. And he probably, he reads about this missile that the Russians tested. We talked about this on Tuesday, and he didn't. He said, "Hey, they're testing nuclear weapons. I mean, because this missile can carry a conventional warhead and the nuclear warhead. Hey, we can, it's a nuclear weapon, so we need to test nuclear weapons." So, Trump obviously was a little confused about that. And I would imagine they probably will go for the testing. But it's not going to make any difference. Um, as I said, I mean, nuclear testing in itself isn't in any way destabilizing. I mean, yeah, Russians will probably say, okay, fine, we'll test them as well. In the same way, nuclear weapons, possessing nuclear weapons is also not destabilizing. What is destabilizing if you start attacking your nuclear adversary? That is destabilizing. Then you're really, really running the risk of provoking a world war. Waging a war with Russia over Ukraine is extremely destabilizing. That's dangerous. Threatening to use tomahawks against Russia, that's suicidal. That's really, really dangerous. But nuclear testing, who the hell cares? As I said, in the heyday of détente, there was an average of 20 underground tests a year conducted by the United States. No one thought this is really destabilizing. So, it's that's what's destabilizing is waging this war against Russia. But the U.S. policymaking establishment, well, that's quite happy with that. Anyway, Steve Kano says atmospheric testing can be argued to be environmentally damaging. So banning that had some purpose. Yeah, they did that. The atmospheric. Yeah, I mean that was the thing. The partial test ban treaty was same with the doing it not doing it underwater. So they said not in the atmosphere and not underwater. So they said, okay, well we'll do it underground. So yeah, that made sense. But as I say, the French continued doing it underwater, and then all the environmentalists, were always France was suddenly this hated country in the 1970s and 80s when they still continued doing these underwater nuclear tests. I mean, I agree. It's had some purpose, and I don't have a problem with banning tests. I mean, if you want to ban tests, fine. But if you want to, but starting them up again is of no importance whatsoever. And this the shrieking today is truly idiotic. Anyway, thank you, Steve K9. Cynthia, always very good to see you, Cynthia. Cynthia, as I say, as a resident film scholar, film expert, always provides us with um, fascinating background information on the films that we feature on Monday night at the movies. So it's always a real pleasure to learn so much more about films and to read all her comments and aesthetic judgments. And we have a real rich poll for the next film screening, which is the theme is films in which you're rooting for the villain. And I put together a list of 8 films. I mean, a really strong kind of team of films. And I think it'll be rich pickings. I don't know which one will prevail. We've got Double Indemnity, The Third Man, Purple Noon, Kind Hearts and Coronets. I think Shadow of a Doubt. Some of the best films made. So Cynthia, I think we'll have a really productive time. Uh, with offering thoughts, reflections, and information about those films. Anyway, Cynthia's question is: the seeming self-unawareness of U.S. elites may be why there's so much consternation over Mamdani becoming the socialist mayor of the world's capital of capitalism. But no one seems to be asking why such an outlier candidate like Mamdani has managed to establish and sustain such a commanding lead in the polls. Yet, with New York City being so incredibly expensive, dirty, and crime ridden, why would anyone want to vote for such an entrenched insider candidate like Andrew Cuomo? I absolutely agree. I mean, beautifully put. Um, I think Mamdani, I mean, basically, you can say he is, I think, a left-wing populist. Now, the the problem for Republicans, for Trump, and I mean, he's denouncing and banging his fist on the table about Mamdani, threatening New York City. I'm not exactly sure what he can do to New York City, but um, this is a problem because Trump tapped into kind of right wing populism, um, and the political establishment really didn't know how to deal with it. I think the Republican, the GOP, was unable to deal with it in 2016. Tried it again in 2024. They couldn't deal with the that right wing populism of Trump's, and of course the political establishment, as embodied by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, also couldn't deal with uh, right wing populism. But a left wing populism that would have could gain some traction. And you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a real problem about New York City. It's completely unaffordable. There was just even in the time that I lived there. When I first came to New York City, which is people could still more or less afford to live there, more or less. That's just gone. I mean, that's it. It's just basically, you have to be a millionaire now to live in New York City. And of course, it is absolutely, you say, dirty and crime ridden. And and so Mandani has picked up on that that our ordinary people, they don't have any kind of a life that they can live, certainly not for their children. So then, of course, there's that, but there's also the kind of the America First angle to what he does, which is he's basically saying, "Well, I'm concerned with you know New Yorkers." And so when I think that when it was at one of those debates, when there was a question asked, um, what's the first place you'll visit when you become mayor? And of course, every candidate, declared, well, of course, it'll be Israel. Israel will be the first place I visit when I become mayor. Of course, because this is, we all know, the high preponderance of Jews in New York. So yeah, Israel, absolutely Israel. And then Mandani said, actually, I have no intention of going anywhere. I'm going to be here in New York, um, dealing with the problems of New Yorkers. So the moment you says that, you said that's America first. That's the America first that Trump kind of tapped into. But of course, as I say, he distorted the meaning of it. But that's it. He said, yeah, I'm mostly concerned. In fact, wholly concerned with the problems of New Yorkers. I have no intention of going anywhere. Now, that was, of course, oh, well, of course, he hates Israel and whatever. But the, foreign policy really it isn't part of in the purview of New York mayors. I mean, it has become that with Rudy Giuliani, in particular, which is Bloomberg, who are always trekking off to Israel, in a kind of shameless attempt to appeal to the Jewish voters of New York. But Mandani doesn't do it. So Mandani, I think, poses a problem for Republicans. Republicans think that they're going to run against Mandani in the way that they ran against AOC, in the way that before that, a kind of a generation before that, they used to run against Edward Kennedy. Oh, Edward Kennedy is a liberal, AOC, communist, Mamdani, communist, Islamist, Israel hater, whatever. That's not going to work because uh, Kennedy was an easy target because there was just a lot. There was a lot that was very unsavory about him, particularly of a Chappaquiddick. And AOC is just a total phony, so it was you could easily push her aside. I don't think Mamdani is a phony. He's very, very well spoken for somebody who's really very young, and he but he could mature into quite a serious political force. And I think how do you beat right wing populism? I think the only way to do it is through left wing populism. Doing the political establishment thing is like you said, Andrew Cuomo. That's not going to do it. It was always a hopeless endeavor of trying to get Andrew Cuomo to defeat Mamdani. Nobody wants to go back to Andrew Cuomo. Nobody wants to go back to the Cuomo dynasty. Um, and Mamdani, is a fresh voice. Now, how much he can do as mayor of the city, I mean, that's very difficult because after all, even Bill De Blasio, and De Blasio wasn't really a populist, but Bill De Blasio, his hands were tied. You have to start, you have to work with the mayor, with the governor, and so the government has a lot of say in what happens in New York. But Mandani can certainly burnish his credentials and burnish his brand for a future run. And I think I think that kind of there's always a market for a kind of left wing populism. Picking up on people's discontent with their standard of life, the lack of improvement in their in the quality of life, in their pay, and everything else. So there's always you can do that. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Why would anyone vote for Andrew Cuomo? I mean, it was just always, particularly as he left office in disgrace. I mean, as I said, I always thought it was a little unfair what happened to him, but nonetheless, it did happen, and he did leave in disgrace. But the idea of he's coming back and anyone's going to want him back. So, and the same goes for this Sleever. I mean, Sleever's been around since forever. He's always failed. He's always been a completely useless figure. Everything he does is kind of is you know, showboating and pointless. No one's going to vote for him. So, so I imagine Mandani will win comfortably, and I think he could be an important force within the Democratic Party. And I think he's less phony than Obama was. At least at the moment. I mean, Obama was a total fraud. I'm not. I don't think Mamdani. I mean, as yet, I'm not sure. But I don't think he's a fraud. Anyway, the Cynthia goes on, and with that in mind, Lewis Carroll said it best as an antidote to our so-called kinder, gentler ruling class, which he wrote as a parody of the poem "How Doth the Little Busy Bee" by Isaac Watts. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? That's nice. How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly spread his claws, and welcomes little fishes with gently smiling jaws. That's very nice. Yes, and welcomes little fishes with gently smiling jaws. Very nice. Thank you so much. Um, and then let me go back to where Cynthia. Um, um, yeah, and then Cynthia goes on. Yet, as Glenn Greenwald aptly points out, Mamdani is already being led by the nose by the Democratic Party operatives, including top ones like Obama and Clinton. That's who's shaping and controlling him. This is largely why we've already seeing less fear among real estate developers and other Zionist tycoons. But it's utterly maddening that the campaign against Mandani only focuses on his criticism of Israel. It's totally irrelevant since foreign policy has nothing to do with the mayor's job. No, I think so. I mean, that was just a way to get at him. I mean, they know. Look, he's a Muslim. He doesn't hide that he's a Muslim. He's both his parents are Muslims. Um, and I mean, he made all sorts of comments in the past about the Intifada and so on. So it's understandable that they raised that issue. But the fact is that he's comfortably ahead in New York, and the fact is that Jews are supporting him. So, trying to make it like, oh, he's anti Semitic and whatever, it's not working because he's enjoying Jewish support. And the whole notion that the Jews are frightened of him is fake. It's put about by by all sorts of ill-intentioned people, much as they did with Jeremy Corbyn, he's anti-Semitic and so on. So I don't think that's going to work. But you're right. How much can he do? I mean, because look, I mean, New York City is it is the center of capitalism. So anyone who's going to be mayor has to has to placate the fountainhead of capitalism, and so we'll have to see what he does. We saw how Bill De Blasio's kind of radicalism didn't really do much, but ultimately, um, you know, you have to, in some ways, address ordinary people's concerns. I mean that's the key in governance. Trump did that to a certain extent, but he hasn't done it since he's returned to power, and which is why his numbers are tanking. So that's going to be the test with Mamdani. It's nothing to do with Israel or anything like that. It's going to be, well, is he actually going to improve the lives of New Yorkers? And that means he's going to have to deal also with the question of crime, because if he somehow adopts the sort of the policy of some of those DAs, which want to decriminalize this, decriminalize that, then he's going to be very unpopular very quickly because people are concerned about crime. They are concerned about the condition of the subways, and if you go down the path of saying, well, uh, if you steal less than $1,000 worth of goods, then we're not going to prosecute you. That's not going to go down well among New Yorkers. So he's going to have to, a left wing populism will nonetheless have to address people's concerns, which is not just unaffordability, but the quality of life, and the quality of life is tied to safety, and therefore he cannot embrace any of those loony theories of those DAs out in California, and the ones who were in LA and San Francisco. And then Cynthia goes on. So if anything, Mamdani will turn out to be nothing more than a rank and file neoliberal Democrat, no different from, say, AOC or Bernie Sanders. As Jimmy Dore once famously said, you cannot change the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party changes you. Yeah, could well be. I think it's more the question of, will he be another Obama? I think that's that's the closest analogy. A kind of a smooth talker, came out of nowhere, very articulate, and got everybody very excited. Is he going to be just a total waste of time and waste of space as Obama was? I don't know. Um, we'll have to see, but he has an opportunity. I think that's it. He has an opportunity here, as Obama had an opportunity, and it turned out to be a complete dud. But I think, just going back to the point, there's always room for a leftist, a left-wing populace. It just so happened that Bernie Sanders was a totally useless creature who really didn't fight his corner. That's therefore it was clearly his left-wing populism was turned out to be nothing. And then Steve K9 says there are also many people who believe that Cuomo is a mass murderer. Yeah, no, I think COVID really hurt him. People really remember him because he thought that he was going to use COVID to ride to power. I mean, he was clearly seeing himself as he was going to be parachuted in to the 2020 Democratic Party convention. The man who somehow rose to the occasion. He was the leader in New York, and because no one was happy with Joe Biden, and so he thought the Democratic Party will turn to him. And then, of course, it all kind of blew up in his face. But absolutely, people do remember what happened in New York and all the nursing home deaths under Cuomo, and the cover-up under Cuomo. And then Marty, always good to see you, Marty. So Marty has, let's take a look at this. Always has a great picture. And here we have the Kissinger. I guess this is the Kissinger. This is that Brezhnev embracing. And he says, ignore them, dearest, as long as you're not stepping on my toes and I'm not stepping on yours. Dissidents. All right. So this is very interesting, this picture that Marty, I never saw that cartoon. But what is interesting is that moment in the 1970s with Nixon, Kissinger, and then Ford was attacked. Liberals were attacking it because somehow the United States government was abandoning the dissidents. We care so much about the dissidents. George McGovern attacked Nixon because Nixon was ignoring the dissidents. And George McGovern attacked Nixon that he wasn't doing enough to facilitate Jewish emigration from the Soviet Union. So, in fact, so the Democratic Party, and that is, cartoonists and the mainstream media that would publish a cartoon like that, was attacking that somehow Nixon and Kissinger were insufficiently perturbed about the state of the dissidents. It's now it's forgotten that Nixon was attacked for that by liberals, by the Democratic Party, that he was abandoning the dissidents. And then it got worse than that with after Nixon was gone, and then he was by Gerald Ford replaced him. That they actually detested the dissidents. That somehow they thought the dissidents were really trying to sabotage the détente policy. And there was this guy who used to work for Kissinger, Hal Sonnenfeld, and there was something called the Sonnenfeld Doctrine, which now is long forgotten. But Sonnenfeld Doctrine, roughly speaking, was that somehow it's in the U.S. interest to make relations between the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe more organic. Because if it's more organic, then there'd be fewer of these explosions in Eastern Europe, which are really very painful. And there's nothing much the United States can do about them, but it creates a lot of aggravation and a lot of tension, and then resentment of the United States that it hasn't done enough for them. So that became the Sonnenfeld Doctrine. He didn't actually articulate this in any article, but this theory was attributed to him. Sonnenfeld worked for Kissinger, and then, of course, liberals attacked the Kissinger-Sonnenfeld Doctrine, which is to sell out Eastern Europe to the Soviet Union. And then when Gerald Ford, in that famous debate with Jimmy Carter in 1976, said, there is no Soviet domination in Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration, then that's it. That all hell broke loose and said, that's it, exactly what we said. Gerald Ford, under the influence of the Kissinger-Sonnenfeld Doctrine, wants Eastern Europe to be under the Soviet jackboot. And so we got Jimmy Carter and Zbigniew Brzezinski, who absolutely did not want Soviet Eastern European relations to be more organic. So it's very interesting you put that cartoon, and that obviously, the whole thrust of it is that, they're hugging and kissing and trampling over the dissidents. The dissidents, they're just being lying under the jackboot. And that, very much in that spirit of that time of détente. So thank you so much, Marty. And then Steve came and says, the Putin story is very weird. He's been in a rut for a long time. Maybe this is an attempt to look bold and different. You're right about the Azov steel affair. Supposedly they sent the Azov guys to Turkey, who would keep them out of the war. But first, they're going to make sure they were treated to some tiramisu and then quickly release them. Russia looked idiotic. Yeah, they looked idiotic because that's it. They went on this plane with Abramovich and they were treated to this tiramisu. And then they went back to Ukraine. And of course, they did what you're supposed to do. They went back to the front. That's what you do with prisoners of war. You have to go back to the front. You're still under command. So it just made absolutely no sense. This makes no sense. I don't know what he thinks he's going to get. Kaya Kallas is going to look favorably on Putin. You think the media will say, "Well, oh boy, Putin believes in the free press." Look, the media, the Western policy establishment, NATO, Trump, the Trump people, everyone, they all hate and despise Russia. That's not going to change. So Russia just needs to finish this war off, get it out of the way, and then move on to other things. not jerk around trying to curry favor with journalists who hate you. Um, and then Marty has let's look at this picture. This is Nixon and Brezhnev, um, the shaking hands, um, and they've both got missiles behind them. But what I can't quite make out is who's the person grabbing at Nixon, trying to pull him away. I don't recognize him. These aren't very good drawings, to be honest. I mean, the Nixon drawing is pretty good. The Brezhnev drawing is terrible, but I can't recognize who's the person who's tugging at Nixon. I mean, it could be Willy Brandt, I'm not sure. But perhaps Marty, you could tell us who's the person tugging at Nixon. Um, and then we have, yeah. Then Robert says, Mamdani can't make New York City socialist, but he can do something worse. Regulatory capitalism by way of rent control in an inflationary environment is more destructive than socialism. Yeah, but he's not going to be able to go back to rent control. That's up to the state government. I mean, it's the state government that controls rents in New York City, and so the mayor of New York has very little say on rents. I mean, all he can do about rents is that he can appoint people onto the rent control board, but all the board does is decide how much you can raise rents by in the coming year. But that's only in those apartments that are rent stabilized. So it's like if they decide, oh well, rents can go up by 2% in the next 12 months. And but that's decided by the board, not by the mayor. But as I say, the mayor does have a say in who's on the board. But in terms of rent control can only be reintroduced by the New York State Assembly. So it's got nothing to do with Mamdani. And I'm not even sure he can set up grocery stores, government grocery stores. I don't think he has the power to do that. I think that's also something that's uh, governed by the New York State. Um, no Eastern Bloc apartment was ever abandoned, much less demolished. But in the 70s, New York City capped rents and rising costs defunded maintenance, leaving the South Bronx in decay and burn. Well, um, you know, the I mean, what I mean, yes, obviously, but you can also say that once they removed any kind of rent control, essentially New York just became completely unaffordable. I mean, at least New York used to be affordable, um, and but then just everything was then lost after that. But but they're not going to return. No one's going back to rent control. I mean, that just goes back to World War II, and then he went on for years and years, and it was very nice, really, for people who inherited a nice apartment. I mean, if you inherited an apartment ridiculously at $200 a month, it was very nice. I mean, I think that Ed Koch, the former mayor of New York, he had this huge Greenwich Village apartment. He paid about a couple of $100s for it. I mean, because he had it. That was rent control, but that was scrapped really many years ago, and that no one's coming back for that. The real estate industry is too powerful, so I don't think Mandan is going to be able to do much about that. Ego says inaccurate. French did not test underwater; they tested underground in an atoll in the South Pacific. They claimed that the other countries had had plenty of time to conduct hundreds of tests, and they needed to catch up since they started later. Also, many of the tests conducted by the US Russian were open air, not underground. Well, I don't think they were. That's not true. I don't think that the tests were. You're right. It was in an atoll in the South Pacific. So yeah, it was that the French did that, but there were no atmospheric tests by the U.S., Russia, and China after 1963. I mean, the 1963 is when they signed the the partial test ban treaty. After the partial test ban treaty, there were no atmospheric tests. I mean, so that's just simply not true. And then anyway, Steve K9 says, in domestic affairs, Trump has accomplished some things. International affairs are 100% controlled by the Zionists. If Gaza has not convinced you of that, nothing will. What is not recognized is the Zionist neocons want to subjugate and loot Russia. They also had familial hatred of Russia. All of that is true. In terms of domestic affairs, I like what he has done using the DOJ and going after the Biden people and all of that, and seeking some accountability for all of the abuses of in the DOJ for that took place. Not just during the Biden years, which was shocking enough, but it goes going back to the Obama years, and I think that's very good if Trump can keep it up, and that I think is a significant accomplishment. Um, and then Steve Kane and Trump walking away from after Anchorage is probably the best thing that could happen for Russia. I kind of agree with you. I think that in a way it's. I mean, there was a deal on the table. The war could have ended. Whether that was good for Russia, I think, is a different question. But the same thing can be said about the Istanbul deal, which was which Boris Johnson sabotaged. That was not a good deal for Russia. So if that agreement had been signed, then then yeah, that would have been very bad for Russia. I think this deal also could have been very bad, but it does show the Russians want to bring this to an end, and that's why they're willing to agree to agreements that are actually very bad for Russia. And as in the case of Ukraine and Boris Johnson, they walked away from that, and it was it was very bad for Ukraine. I don't know how many lives have been lost, bad also for Russia, but it would have been a bad deal. The Istanbul deal in 2022 would have been a bad deal, and I agree with you. I think this deal that Witkoff and Trump had cooked up would have been a bad deal for Russia, but Russia was willing to go for it, and so if they're willing to go for it, then you know, bring it to an end. I mean, my view is that look, wars need to come to an end. You can't just keep dragging them out. I mean, either if you either win it. If you're not able to win it, then bring it to an end. I mean, there's just no point to just keep it going forever, and this attrition war, thinking that somehow it's going to come to an end at any time soon. Attrition means it's going to go on for a long, long time. And then NKMRD says, to some degree, serious threats of war are enough to make the arms industry intensify and profit a lot. It makes it so hard to figure out what is happening in all of this. However, the debt the U.S. and Germany got into are a warning sign. Yeah, no, I agree with you. That's a really that's very good. Yes, you're right. It's good for the arms industry, but if it's a debt, then that debt is imposed on the public. So the people in the arms industry, they make a bundle, but who's paying for it? Then the public's going to pay for it. I mean, if it's a debt, you're going to have to pay for that debt. So it's just public is going to lose out whatever the profits that certain people make. And then Steve Kane says people in New York City and other cities are afraid of black crime. Yes, because it is the overwhelming majority. You won't hear that in the mainstream media. But of course, that's exactly right. That is always what people fear, um, and that's going to be the make or break for Mamdani. I mean, if he doesn't, um, if he fails to address crime, and in fact crime starts um, really spiking under him because he starts appointing all kinds of loony uh, district, prosecutors or whatever, then yeah, then that's it. Then his time in office will be very brief. Um, Unless things have changed a lot, the mayor of New York City has a lot of power. Well, I don't think that's true. So much of New York is governed by Albany. I mean, it's governed by the legislature in Albany. It's governed by the governor. So there is really very much a limited amount that the mayor can do. And we saw that with other mayors. They can make certain appointments. Um, Giuliani made a difference because of the certain appointments that he made. Um, in the education department. There's appointments in who's police commissioner, so he can do certain things. But on big policy, then ultimately it is Albany that decides. And then Cynthia says Cuomo will lose because of Israel fatigue. I think Cuomo will lose because of Cuomo fatigue. To be honest, I think he and his father. This is you're going back. His dad ran against Ed Koch in 1977. 50 years, basically 50 years, the Cuomos have dominated New York politics. There is a real fatigue about the Cuomos. Anyway, my time is up, long up. So thank you so much, everybody who joined me. Thank you so much for all of your really interesting comments and questions. And above all, thank you so much for those who have contributed to the tip jar, knowing how irate and irascible the dogs are. They're going to be up quite shortly. First thing they do, check the tip jar. Second thing they do is express their anger and frustration. Third thing is they want to have words with me. So that's my ordeal for tomorrow. But anyway, that's my ordeal. That's nobody else's. Thank you so much, everybody who did contribute to the tip jar. And so we're going to have some more podcasts over the weekend. And then next Monday, we will, I hope, be able to have a joint live stream with Peter, unless there are internet outages as there were last Monday. So until then, thank you for tonight. See you very soon. All the best. Bye-bye.